conference, I'm just going to do a couple of bits of housekeeping before we go into the main part of the conference. So firstly, as delegates, you cannot unmute, unfortunately, but we do want to encourage participation throughout the conference. So please do use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to pose questions to our presenters today. At the end of every keynote and every presentation, there will be time for Q&A, and we'll do our very best to get through as many as possible. In addition, please feel free to use the hashtag SHConference21 and post any views and thoughts throughout the day to continue the conversation. Secondly, please do continue to refer to your conference booklet or to the Study Hire conference. The web address is on the screen. As you will find the links for all the sessions throughout today on the website and in the booklet. The conference today has 3 parts, and each part has a separate link, so do make sure you click the correct link on the website or in the booklet as you go through today. I think that's all from me. I'll now hand over to Professor Gavin Brooks, Provost and Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Buckinghamshire University and the Chair of the Study Hire Board. Gavin, over to you.
Thanks, Lou, and good morning, everybody. And a very warm welcome to what is now the 4th annual Study Hire Conference. And this year we're focusing the discussion on working with further education colleges and adult learners. My name's Gavin Brooks, and I'm Provost and Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Buckinghamshire New University, and I'm also very pleased to be Chair of the Study Hire Board. For those of you who might not be aware, Study Hire is one of the 29 partnerships that makes up the UniConnect programme, and it operates across Buckinghamshire, Berkshire, Oxfordshire and Swindon. Buckinghamshire New University has a long-standing commitment to widening participation, and we're delighted to continue to be a part of the Study Hire partnership, along with Oxford Brookes University, the University of Reading and the University of Oxford, plus 11 other partner colleges and organisations. I and the board hope that today's conference will provide an excellent opportunity and platform for practitioners to across the sector to showcase and share the great work they deliver through both university and college outreach, through UniConnect and through other initiatives to support learners' educational progression. In the first session this morning, we're fortunate to have 2 excellent high-profile speakers. And the first of those I'll introduce is Chris Millwood, who will be familiar to those of you who have attended any of the previous Study Hire conferences, because I'm delighted that he's attended each of the and been the plenary speaker on each of the conferences that we've held. And Chris, I'm delighted you're here again today. So Chris is Director for Fair Access and Participation in the Office for Students. And his role at the OFS is to help students and communities throughout England by ensuring that universities and colleges are doing all they can to support underrepresented groups to access, succeed in higher education and to progress, of course, into successful careers. So Chris, I'm going to hand over to you without any further ado, and thank you again for coming and presenting. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Gavin, and hi, everyone. Hope you're all well. So as Gavin has said, this is a kind of fixture in my autumn calendar throughout my time at OFS. We started in Reading in 2018 when I just started, and we were in OFS launching reforms to access and participation and moving into a new phase of UniConnect. Then the next year, I think we were in Oxford. I think we just finished negotiating new longer running plans with universities and colleges across the country. Last year, we met in the midst of the pandemic. And now, hopefully, many of you are working, back in your universities and colleges. I know it's just been great to come and visit staff and students again. And I know there's a real buzz around campuses across the country. So I'm sorry, this isn't face-to-face, but hopefully it'll be a good two-way session nonetheless. I had a bit of a look at what I said in 2018 when I first spoke at this conference. And as you might expect, it kind of focused on the case for change. It reflected on the progress we'd made on widening participation over 2 decades due to, on the one hand, the expansion of places, but also, of course, the crucial work that people like all of you have done to pull students through to universities and colleges. We also identified in that session how we'd been improving opportunity by widening participation, but not making much progress on equality of opportunity, because actually the whole system has expanded. And certainly what you might call the most advantaged groups of students were continuing to dominate some parts of the sector, the most selective courses and what flows from that in terms of jobs. When we made changes in 2018, they were in a way intended to do everything we could to address that, noting that, you know, the sphere you're working in and I'm working in, we can't run schools and we can't run the labour market, but we've got to do everything we can to kind of catalyse the efforts of universities and colleges to improve access, to improve student success and opportunities beyond that. At the heart of a lot of what we've been doing is really 4 things. So firstly, greater clarity and honesty about the position in every university and college, drawing on national data for different groups of students. Secondly, being more ambitious. So taking longer, being more ambitious about making progress on addressing inequality. Thirdly, a stronger focus not just on access, but what happens to students when they get into university and beyond that. And lastly, and this is very central to all the work that you're doing, maturing our approach to evaluation, understanding better what works or not, and the effect of the activity you're delivering and all the money that's being invested. Alongside that, what we might call individual pressure on universities and colleges, we've also identified a need for collaboration. So you can't all do this on your own. That's, of course, the rationale very strongly for UniConnect and the continued funding of UniConnect and partnerships like Study Hire. Also for the TASO What Works Centre, which is trying to set standards for evaluation across the sector, share practice, share findings. And actually, we're finding that the UniConnect partnerships are playing an absolutely central role in relation to this evaluation agenda, because you have the capability, you're developing the expertise, and there's a scale of evaluation going on beyond, I think, anything that's been done before. In January 2019, we celebrated a lot of the commitments that have been made through access plans and also the work of UniConnect partnerships by launching a report in the Houses of Parliament. And of course, when we did that, we didn't realise that within 6 weeks, we'd all be moving in to lockdown with schools and colleges and universities and all of your work essentially moving online. And a lot of work we've done with you since then has been trying to understand the impact of the pandemic, working with universities and colleges, students, partnerships like you, on one hand to just sustain the activity, keep it going in the different environment, sustain the level of ambition, but also understand how what effect it might have and what changes it might make for the longer term as well. We've been pulling some of that together through 2 routes over the last year. One is the assessment of monitoring reports we've been getting from universities about their access and participation plans, as colleges as well. And then also the evaluation of UniConnect. So I thought it might be quite helpful to share some of the findings from those 2 things. If I start with the monitoring returns, and they are, of course, if you're involved in this, you'll know that this is for the 19-20 plans, which precede a lot of the longer running plans that you're now working with, although we did ask for insights on what the effect of the pandemic might be on the future work. We had emphasised through our guidance the need for reasonable judgments during lockdown about varying your plans, but particularly put the emphasis on honouring financial commitments to students during a period where obviously there's a lot of hardship. So a lot of the work we did on monitoring was about gaining assurance that those reasonable judgments had been made and that promises to students about money had been honoured. We were really pleased to gain that assurance for the most part across the sector. We spent a lot of time really chasing down the investment to make sure that had happened with students. And we saw overall actually the investment had increased. So universities and colleges had to put more in overall to address hardship, technology, accommodation needs during the pandemic. Some of the things that universities and college flags were firstly, as you know, a lack of capacity within schools to engage with outreach, given the conditions, and of course a shift away from face-to-face delivery. Quite a lot of innovation in relation to the timing and mode of assessment in universities. Careers services moving online, but again innovating in relation to the delivery of placements and other forms of work experience, as well as the broader graduate recruitment process. And universities and colleges saying, well, all of these changes actually could bring some benefits in the longer term in terms of reach, flexibility. So some of it will definitely continue. Students highlighted, well, firstly, the dedication of staff and the quality of support that they felt they'd had often during the pandemic. Also, for some students, the benefits of blended delivery. So some interest and appetite for that. But of course, a very strong awareness about the disproportionate impact the pandemic had on the poorest students, students with disabilities, students without family support. We'll be pulling all of this together and publishing it in November, so do look out for that. So what have we learned through the UniConnect evaluations? Well, we know that partnerships engaged with nearly 185,000 learners in almost 2,500 schools and colleges last year alone, and that's actually the target learners, so that's the learners in the most disadvantaged areas that were a real priority for us. 1,150 schools and colleges received direct investment through UniConnect. There were 540 staff from UniConnect based in schools and colleges, and partnerships signposted 27,000 enquiries from schools and colleges about university outreach. So that's an incredible volume and impact of activity. Schools are telling us that the quality of activities delivered is the most important reason for them engaging, and the way in which those activities can align with their own goals. For example, Gatsby benchmarks, subject stretch for students, developing their own staff. We know also that what UniConnect is doing is about sustained multi-intervention approaches, so engaging with learners beyond a kind of one pass. And it seems very clear that that sustained engagement is really key, at least 3 to 6 hours across an academic year, or 7 to 8 times over years 12 to 13, really crucial to shifting understanding, knowledge of options, and confidence in decision making. During the pandemic, 85% of UniConnect activities were delivered online during the peak lockdown, compared with only 4% before that. So of course, that's a radical shift. And actually that, we think, engaged 13,400 more learners who previously hadn't had any sustained contact with partnerships. So there have been some benefits in terms of reach. Nonetheless, there are, of course, barriers to engagement through these modes, access to technology, more evaluation needed about the benefits of working in different ways. What we are learning, and the rapid evaluation work we've done, suggests some limited evidence that online mentoring has been as effective as face-to-face. But as you might expect, some less immersive approaches to things like summer schools may have been less effective in helping learners understand what student life is like, for example. So we'll factor all that evidence into discussions we're having in government about the next phase of the programme, funding for the programme. And I think we keep saying this, do use that evidence as well with your local stakeholders, local politicians, your partners, because that's really crucial to influence future funding. It's too early yet to see the impact of UniConnect across access, patterns of access and fundamental patterns of access to higher education. But I think we are, of course, and you'll all be experiencing this, seeing some really striking patterns in the admissions data this year and last year. So this time last year, I reported record entry rate to higher education in England, record numbers of students from underrepresented groups. And again, the same thing has happened. Record entry rates, record numbers from the most underrepresented. Higher education is more popular than ever, and there are more students entering from the lowest participation neighbourhoods. Equally, going back to what I said in 2018, there are even more students entering from the most advantaged neighbourhoods. So we're still, I would say, in the position of doing terrific work to improve opportunity. Great credit to everything you're doing on that. And also a reflection of how central higher education is now to the aspirations of young people and families and schools across the country. But actually, it's very hard to improve the quality of opportunity. And I think that's what we're seeing, because still attainment expectations and admissions are quite profoundly affected by the different resources available to families and schools across the country. And I think we saw that particularly clearly during the pandemic. So just to quote one thing from the IFS Deaton review on the pandemic, it said, "Coronavirus has cruelly exposed huge variations in how easily we're able to weather threats to livelihoods, to physical and mental health, and to educational progress. These disparities have been closely correlated with pre-existing inequalities between groups according to income, location, ethnicity, and education." And I think you can see that very clearly in the differences in learning hours between, for example, state and private sectors, between the most and least advantaged communities during lockdown, and the way in which that is translating into GCSE, A-level and other educational results this summer. So it is translating into admissions, and there's a big challenge to be addressed. So what might all this mean for you? Well, on the one hand, OFS will continue to work with universities and colleges to get the access plans on track as we emerge from the pandemic. We also know we'll want to agree some variations with you to address new imperatives. In a similar vein, we've agreed now to fund UniConnect and to fund the next programme through this Parliament to 24-25 at least, but we're waiting for the spending review, which I think is the 27th of October, to have a sense of what the funding may look like. I'm expecting two issues to be really important for the focus of these two strands of access and participation work during the coming years. The first is, of course, as you know, and really what a lot of what you'll be talking about today, is the goal to diversify the routes taken through post-18 education, with more people taking apprenticeships, entering higher education through further education and work, and later in their life. So that's one important thing. The second is, I think there will inevitably be a push for universities and colleges to play their full part in the effort to address lost learning in schools, with a particular focus on academic knowledge and achievement. So I think both of those will be important for the government's funding and policy thinking in the future, the broader settlement for post-18 education, and of course the funding for activities like UniConnect and the approach to access and participation plans. We've been trying to position UniConnect for this because, of course, we've all known about this direction for some time, putting more focus on the involvement of FE colleges, on mature learners, and supporting a wide range of educational pathways and choices. So it's great that that is the focus of your conference today. I hope that will position you well for the coming years. I do think that Study Higher and the 28 university partnerships can really be the place where this comes together. Thanks very much.
Chris, thank you ever so much. That's given a really good sort of start, I think, and for us to have some wider discussion. And as you say, the pandemic really has had a significant impact in a way that we'd never have imagined in terms of the learning and I guess availability of that learning for disadvantaged students versus advantaged students. Can I just ask for any questions that you might have for Chris to be posted in the chat, and I will pick those up and communicate those so that everyone can hear them. And Rose, thank you for putting your first question in, which I'll come to first. So the question here, Chris, is how do you feel UniConnect can best work collaboratively with stakeholders such as careers hubs and the National Careers Service to avoid duplication?
So we have a number of discussions nationally with counterparts, and we've tried where appropriate to jointly issue guidance about working together and identify ways of working together, but we've tried to avoid that being too prescriptive. And there's a key element of UniConnect which is about local responsiveness. So I'd say two things. One is, if you think there are things we could do nationally through our engagement with DFE and the organisations to make this more joined up, then let us know. We're always cautious about being too prescriptive, but if you think there are issues we could resolve nationally or guidance we could give, then let us know that. Ultimately, though, I suspect a lot of this will be better solved locally through your own relationships with people working in your local areas. And the key kind of key element running through UniConnect is local responsiveness. So do let us know if there's anything we can do to help nationally, but I think it's crucially about relationships locally.
Thanks, Chris. And Rose, hopefully that's helped address that. There's a couple of other questions coming in, but if I can ask one as well. This was something you mentioned early on when you were giving the assessment of the monitoring reports, really, and the observation, which I suspect none of us are surprised at, with the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus pandemic on disabled and other disadvantaged students. And I wondered if you've yet been able to identify what we might be able to do to address that disproportionate impact.
So I think so you can see this running all the way through the chain to a certain extent. There is an impact in schools, and you can see that starting to transpire in the results that we saw this summer. And of course, that goes all the way down the chain. And as I mentioned at the end of my session, I think you will see a push for universities in particular to contribute to the broader effort to address what you might call lost learning in schools, whether that's through tutoring, a particular focus on academic content and achievement, etc. I always kind of urge a degree of caution about that, because we're the regulator of higher education, and most of you are working in universities and colleges, and ultimately it will be in schools that the solutions will be found for this. But I do think you can expect a big push for universities to help with that. There's then the students who are arriving with you now. And I mean, I know from my own children, they've lost, there's chunks of their learning they've missed. And there's things that you might expect them to be able to do that they can't. And I know that universities are having to look and work very closely with students on arrival to understand their capabilities, and to see what particular support they may need for transition, given what they've experienced in school. I think the group of students who were with you already, I've had a really difficult time. They've had an exceptionally difficult time. Some of them nearly 2 years of disruption of a period that should have been, one of the most special times of their lives. So I feel huge sympathy for them. I know some of them, if you take students with disabilities, for example, some of them have found that they have been supported in ways they've been calling for some time, more flexible learning patterns. So I do think working with those students to identify what has been best for them, what they want to sustain, and using that to develop new models for the future will be a great thing you could do at the moment. And that's crucially about listening to the students, I think.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Really helpful. Couple of other questions then. So the first one here is, given the expanded remit for UniConnect partnerships, particularly working with adults, do you think there's a risk of diluting our important work with younger students?
I just think you've got to see this as it's not just about UniConnect, it's about wholesale change to the whole system. So if you look at what is likely to flow through in terms of post-18 reform and the lifelong learning entitlement, this is not about bolting some funding for adults into a system that's mostly about young people. It's about changing the whole system so we think differently about learning more flexibly at different times of life. So for me, this is about UniConnect partnerships, starting to think about how you can work with that new environment, which is not about young people with some adults added into it. It's about just enabling different pathways at different times of life, and the policy and regulation and funding supporting all of that. I think we know that this will require some transition. So this year we're not going to be, I think this reflects, you know, the next question, we're not going to be demanding engagement targets for adults or anything like that. I think you've just got to start to think about, okay, what's the system moving towards? A kind of more holistic lifelong learning system. So how can we over time adapt our approaches towards that?
Thank you. And as you say, that does touch on Rasheen's question there as well. So let's move to Lou's question, which is your views around targeting adult learners for UniConnect partnerships going forwards. Do you think there's value in partnerships working with adults in the community, or will the focus remain on adults currently in further education colleges?
So I think we need to learn from that. And I think you will know in your local areas what's the best way of pulling students through. I'm particularly interested in the current environment, in building bridges between further education colleges and universities, not least because I think a lot of the language and rhetoric pulls them in different directions. So I see that as a really crucial thing that universities can do within the partnership, around the table, getting universities and FE colleges to work together. So that's why we're particularly interested in that. But you will know in your local area whether there are other ways, you know, community groups, organizations that will be a good way of doing this. So I think, again, we're keen to learn from how you start on this work over the next year or so to see what we should build in the future.
Thanks, Chris. That's good. Then move to Sam's question here, Samantha's question. So one of the goals about diversifying the routes through to HE. So obviously what Sam's mentioning here is BTEC, but obviously you also mentioned apprenticeships and there are HTQs, etc. So what's your view on that?
So I think the BTEC issue is a matter of regret. So it's been crucial to widening participation to higher education for some time, and we've seen huge numbers of students coming in with BTECs and thriving in HE, and indeed many universities thinking very carefully about how they would support BTEC students early on to succeed, and more universities using that as a way through. So I think there are big issues for widening participation in terms of that change. I worry, coming back to what I was saying earlier, that a lot of the language around T levels and A levels, apprenticeships and HE, FE and HE, knowledge and skills is all about separate, drawing boundaries between the two. And what we've got to be thinking about is how the kind of work you do is enabling people to bridge between academic and technical education, to develop their knowledge as well as their skills, to bridge between FE as well as HE. So I just think a big thing is to cut through the kind of binary presentation of these issues and show in practice how what you're doing is working across both.
Great, thank you. So Deborah's put in a question here really around, and we see this of course with any of our students who come in, they've got different range of abilities in some ways. So, but we're talking about adult learners here who may have entry levels of level 1 to 3. How do you think we offer a more tailored approach to how we might offer a more tailored approach to these students rather than this sort of blanket adult learner approach? Yeah,
I think we need to learn from what people try and do in the first year. And a key issue for me is we need to get the partnerships together to share our learning from this. An obvious point for me is that this is ultimately about progression to higher levels. So one of the things you're going to take into account is where are the best opportunities for progression into higher levels, and that may well influence where you decide to target your work. But it seems to me from a lot of the questions I'm getting here, one of the things the OFS ought to do, sometime into next year is bring the partnerships together, look at what kind of strategies you're using in relation to the broad theme of adult learners, share experience, and that will help us to kind of provide more focus beyond this.
Great, thank you. And you've mentioned CSR. Obviously, none of us, well, some of us do have an indication of what might be in there, I'm sure. But and it's great to hear that UniConnect will receive support at least till 24-25. But in terms of that value for money element that you mentioned very early on as well, how do you feel government is, I guess, responding to what has happened so far? Because you said in some cases it's very early to demonstrate benefit. There are some benefits, absolutely, from the UniConnect element. It has, in some cases, as we've said, it's an adjunct to our widening participation activity that occurs in our own individual institutions, and that's the right thing. But I think going forwards for any of us in the UniConnect family, as it were, good to know what your thoughts might be in terms of funding going forwards. You know, is there likely to be resource that's still of the level we have at the moment? Do you think it's going to erode? I mean, crystal ball do you have? But, you know, just be good to give any reflections.
No, I mean, I think, obviously there's been a reduction in funding from 60 million to 40 million this year.
Yeah.
And I guess my position on this has been there and no further. You know, so you know, once you start to erode beyond that level, you really start to eat in the capability of the partnerships and their presence in the 29 areas they're working in. So a starting point for me is to say, you know, not unusual for a program that's been running for some time to have a reduction in funding and to focus on areas where the learning suggests it might have the most impact. But if you start to reduce it below this level, then it becomes really problematic. So that's partly, of course, what we're saying. The other is that what we've built up over a period of years is this really good evaluation evidence. There's probably not evidence like that elsewhere across higher education access and participation because the scale and capability of the work. So we can demonstrate that sustained engagement makes a difference. It really does shift confidence about decision making and enables informed decision making, which is crucially important. So we need to be deploying those evaluation findings, and you'll all have your own examples of that in your local areas to show how important this is to things that matter, which is students ultimately making informed decisions, whilst also showing that, in a sense, what you've got here is an infrastructure which can adapt to the changing landscape. So we've been talking about, you know, perhaps different routes through HE, and you've got an infrastructure of partnership between the key players in the 29 areas that can help to support all of that. So those are the kind of arguments, I think. Ultimately, you know, the spending review on the 27th, and then that will translate through to OFS grant and decisions about UniConnect. But my starter is, you know, we need to at least maintain what we've got.
That's brilliant. Thank you. One last question I'm going to take now, which has just come in from Rasheen. So are you aware of any universities and colleges who deliver joint HE courses? Do you see this as a possibility to support FE colleges and progression for students?
Is that like a joint qualification?
Rasheen, do you want to just be a bit more clear on that one? I mean, it might well be that that's what is being proposed. This might also link in, of course, to the HNDs is possibly there. It might also link, Chris, into the skills paper, of course, where it's sort of lifelong learning, modularization. You get one element in one.
Yeah. So Gavin's frozen on my screen.
I'm not aware of anyone.
No, sorry, you briefly froze there, Gavin, on my screen. I don't know if you did.
Oh, sorry. Let me say again. It was related to the skills paper, paper, and the ambition there that lifelong learning can happen in different organisations throughout a person's lifetime. So I guess this is potentially that. Yeah.
So and there's further clarification in the chat. So yeah, it seems to me, so we're running the short course trial at the moment, which is designed to gather learning for the lifelong learning entitlement, and we're just starting to look at the bids which are deliberately innovative for that. And it will be really interesting to see whether, you know, you have these partnership approaches with one partner delivering one part and another. It seems to me, I don't know of anybody that's kind of jointly awarding qualifications, but you know, a joined up approach to delivering different parts of the offer and enabling progression from one to the other, recognizing standing and credit, etc. That absolutely is going to be the important territory for this new world of, you know, lifelong learning entitlement, where the desire is for students to be able to build up chunks that they can deploy over time. And some of those chunks will necessarily be best gained in FE and FE colleges, and others, depends how far you go up, but others in universities. So that kind of joint work, I think, will be really important. Hopefully we'll see some of that in the short course pilots.
Indeed. Great. Chris, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to everyone for your questions also. And as Sally says, she'll say something about this in her talk, which gives a good segue into our next speaker. But Chris, thank you again for attending and again, opening the conference. Really good start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm now delighted to move on to our next speaker, who is Sally Dicketts. And Sally is the Chief Executive Officer of Activate Learning. She's held a number of senior posts in both secondary schools and further education in her career. She became principal at Milton Keynes College in '96, and then in 2003 became the first principal of Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. She now leads Activate Learning, which those of you who know about this is seemingly ever expanding. And it brings together at the moment in one group across Oxfordshire, Berkshire and Surrey, 7 FE colleges, 4 UTCs, 2 11 to 18 secondary schools, and a training provider delivering apprenticeships. So Sally has oversight of all of that. In addition to that, she's a tireless campaigner and advocate for the learning and skills sector. She's president of the Association of Colleges and a board member of Education and Training Foundation and the AOC itself. She also chairs a range of national and regional committees, all related to education and learning. And I'm delighted that, in fact, despite being so busy, we've managed to persuade her to join the Study Hire Board as well. So, Sally, delighted to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you in the audience. I'm going to slightly do something different to Chris. I am going to look at delivering the white paper to boost the economy and look at it through the eyes of adults. I've also been in education. This is my 44th year. So I'm actually going to refer back to some of the practice that we used to have, certainly when I was in ILIA a long time ago in London. So if we take my first slide. Thank you. I think we just need to look at what is the government after, because I sometimes think in education, whether we're universities, colleges or schools, we think it's about funding us, and it is, but for a purpose. And I think the white paper is very clear. We have a lot of adults who have not got the right skills to boost our economy. And I think we can see that at the moment. If you've tried to get petrol, we haven't got enough HGV drivers, which is always interesting when we're interested in higher level skills. But I'll leave that for you to ponder if any of you have been queuing up. So what are the key elements of this white paper, and where does it touch us in this audience? So there are 4 key elements. No, 5. I'm going to discuss 4. The first one I'm going to look at is the lifetime skills guarantee, and what does that actually mean to adults? I want to look at employers at the heart of education, because Chris talked a lot about FE and HE working together. And I think this is an area that we don't, and we need to look at if we're really going to address the adult skills issue. Collaboration. I do, as I'm now the president of the AOC, have lots of interesting discussions, certainly with the previous Secretary of State and Skills Minister, about how well government departments collaborate, and are we meant to use them as our role model, because they don't. We have an issue of staffing and recruitment, and the white paper talks about funding and accountability, and I'm not going to pick that up. So let's look at the lifetime skills guarantee. It sounds exciting. We don't know exactly what the funding is, but what does this actually mean for us? And I want us to look at the workforce and all of those people in the workforce. We want all these adults who are working, who, let's put it this way, by 2050, most of the individuals in the workforce will still be in the workforce then. So they're not going to be leaving to join a college or a university full time. They're going to be doing it part time, but they're time poor and they're salary poor. So they will be the people with the lowest skills and people who are probably maximising their working hours in order to just survive and pay. And if you're going to get things like free school meals, the whole of your family income must be under 8,000. And given the region that all of us live in, imagine living on that. So they're not going to be getting things like free school meals, so they'll be working. The other thing is we do a lot of work with adults, we do a lot of work with our apprenticeships, and we haven't talked about employers and their support. For these individuals particularly, there isn't much employer support. Your lorry driver or your production worker does not get the same level of support as your senior leader if they want to do a leadership programme. And I think that is an area that we need to collaborate on. But the biggest factor for me are the learning requirements. So I want to take two students, and we'll say for the sake of argument, they left one of our colleges and they were successful at level 2. So they were 17 in 2000, 21 years ago. They got level 2 and they rock up now at 38 to do a level 3 programme, hopefully to go on to one of the universities in the room. One worker has worked for an employer where there has been no training whatsoever. And that individual for 21 years has fundamentally not used their brain. So I'm going to take Gavin, because he's in my eye line, and a brain is not dissimilar to a muscle in your body. I put Gavin to bed, I make sure he's well fed and well looked after, but he physically cannot move. We come back a year later and say to Gavin, get out of bed. Gavin will be not able to move. His muscles will have atrophied. And unless he's a super sportsman, and I'm sure you are, Gavin, it will take him about 9 to 11 months to actually get back to his current physical fitness. Well, if your brain is like that and you left with a level 2 qualification in 2000 and you literally, these individuals, and we've got several courses at the moment for similar people, they have not read a book, they don't read, they haven't read a magazine. The way their brains are now functioning, what the lifetime skills guarantee is saying is they can now do a level 3. They're probably behind the skills level they had at 16. So what are we going to do about those individuals? And they certainly couldn't go on to a level 4, 5 or a degree programme, whatever their employer thinks. Now, however, let's take our second employee who works for a very forward-thinking employer, and they have been constantly trained and constantly developed. So we are going to have learners who come to us for a lifetime skills guarantee with the same qualification from 2000, but their brains in a hugely different and more complex manner. So what are we going to do about it? We can go on to the next slide, please. So I want next to look at collaboration. I think the problems I've outlined do require, and I would agree with the government's white paper on collaboration. However, I have been, as I said, in the sector for 44 years, and I have rarely seen highly effective long-term collaboration. I've absolutely seen good collaboration. I've also experienced being hugely let down, running programs with one university that isn't in the room, where they pulled out and we actually, students suffered. So how do we collaborate? And one of the things I think we need to do is look at the full range of those adults. We need much more long-term planning and thinking through how do we take a student that fundamentally has been employed for years but has had no training, and those that are actually at a really good state of development. If I go back in time, and I'm afraid I'm going to when I was in London a number of years ago, we worked very well with our local universities, but level 4 and 5 was taught actually in the college. And then we worked with the university who took those students on, and they did level 6 and in some cases level 7. It was all part-time, none of it was full-time. It was also modular, and I'll come back to what the government has been looking at in that area. So I think the first thing we need to do at both the strategic and senior level is to look at what do we want that collaboration to be? How do we do it? And I'm talking about 5 to 10 years, whereas at the moment, because of the way we're funded and the way we look at it, we do it on a yearly basis. We will not address those adults that I've just mentioned in the economy without collaborating together, partly because we've got to do some of it online, some of it's got to be in person, and we need all through learning. And the second point is, you cannot have a decent collaboration and a decent partnership unless the people in the partnership are equals. And by equals, I mean have equal power, equal status, and equal independence. If you are dependent, then it's a parent-child relationship, and what we want is adult relationships. My experience in the past, and one of the reasons why it feels much more comfortable to be a very large organisation with a turnover of 150 million, you are more like and more equal to a university. But if you're a local college and you're on 15 million, how do we make the relationship equal? Because it doesn't feel it, and we cannot have that collaboration and long-term planning. Now let's look at what the government is proposing. Probably for the first time ever, colleges now are, or were certainly, the darling child of the government. We're not being funded as that, but I looked at our current Secretary of State was on Radio 4 yesterday, waxing lyrical about vocational skills and further education. The Minister for Higher Education has got some challenges for higher education and is critical on aspects of part-time adult learning for higher education. And certainly from what I understand is the government is very interested in modularisation. And I think that could be really exciting for us. And I'll come back to that in my conclusion. The other thing, and there was a big meeting of the 4 nations in Edinburgh last week, was looking at and considering, could we go with the Scottish model, which is cost effective for government, helps out particularly adults, and you do 2 years within a further education context, because delivery is cheaper there, and then you do 2 years in a university environment, topping up to what that means. I'm not making any judgment, I'm just saying I do agree with modularisation. Again, when I was in London and we had lots of money in ILIA, there were some amazing programmes with people like Birkbeck, where students did a really exciting modular education, and they did it both in the local college and in the local university. So I think there's in the past some incredible examples. And if we could go on to my last slide, for those of you who might now be asleep, as our concentration span is 10 minutes and it's been absolutely maxed out. So my first proposition would be, if we want to deliver what the government and actually what the UK PLC needs, which is highly able, highly flexible, learning through life, then we need to actually plan that together as FE through to HE and employment. I think we could do it in a really exciting way where we maximise numbers and we don't have the fear of, oh, you're taking from HE, oh, you're taking from FE. And the more you plan into the future, the more confidence and collaboration you get. The second thing is I am very interested and have been in neuroscience, and it's one of the key drivers at Activate Learning. And we treat all learners as though they learn the same. If you are under 25, your brain is redeveloping from puberty to 25. It doesn't fully develop till 25. Your level of risk, your lack of empathy, etc., is massive and therefore pedagogy needs a very defined way of teaching and learning. Andragogy, i.e. post 25, is very different. Your fear is greater. The way you interact with people is different. Your insecurities, particularly if you're in a workplace and you're a failed learner, are massive. So I think the other thing is looking at how do we actually engage adults? And I think for universities where the bulk of your population has been 18 to probably 24, you won't have had to have worried about that. And I think FE colleges don't always differentiate between andragogy and pedagogy. I think we could do some really fantastic work together on that. The biggest gain is with employers. We need to actually educate employers. They believe that if they upskill people, that's the answer. Actually, for some employers, there is no demand for their employment. And what we need to do is work with them to help them on that demand and actually planning it. And I think HGV drivers is a really good example. Our petrol providers knew this was going to happen, but it meant increasing salaries and they deferred it, and we've got what we've got. So I think we should work in a much more constructive way. And rather than knock on the door and say, oh, do apprenticeships with us, no, do it with us, I think that should be planned in a more systematic way. We could then streamline our processes about how we attract more adults. The way we recruit, the way we attract, the way we do it in FE is so different to HE. Many of our students don't understand the transition and we don't make it easy enough for them. So I think we should look at, do our processes, it's an either or. I must go to college because that's where I get funded, or I must go to university. If I actually wanted to do some modules from FE and some from HE, our processes prevent it. So does our funding to some extent, but I think that's another area we could look at. But finally, how do we actually work together as equals in a long-term relationship for the mutual benefit of all adults in the workplace, some of whom have been so far from learning, if we're not careful, they will remain in poverty, actually draining us, and they will actually be a drain on the National Health Service. If we work together, we could actually improve the lives of all, not the lives of some. And that is it, Gavin.
Sally, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we've got 3 questions at the moment in the chat. I've got a number, but I don't think we're going to get through by the time we have to end at 11, but let's take them in order at the moment. But so the first one, which I think is a really interesting one. At level 3, there's a requirement, obviously, to have your English and maths that wouldn't have been there 20 years ago. So we might need to find a way to incorporate that upskilling. Any thoughts on that one?
Well, I think it's an interesting one, in the sense also they're likely to make it a requirement to do university courses. So I think the whole English and maths, I think we need to look at how we teach English and maths. I think for many of our students, when they come to us at 16, let alone 36, they're switched off, they hate maths or English, depending on their background. They come into the room and they don't learn because they believe they can't learn. So I think we need to actually fundamentally change the way we teach it and the way we look at it. One of our biggest successes actually in maths has been using Century Maths, which is AI assisted, and actually even records if a student is hovering because they're struggling, they're hovering because they're bored and watching a game, and our results have improved because of that. I also think we need to look at as whether English and Maths GCSE personally is the right qualification. We want literate people. and we want numerate people. And it is interesting, even when English and Maths GCSE was examined externally, the quality was variable. So we would have some students that would come to us with a 4 or a 5 at GCSE, whose English was poor, and other students who had a 4 or 5 where it's good. I suspect it's because they've been extremely well taught to pass an exam, and because they've done nothing over the summer, they've gone back because actually they're well qualified but illiterate. And I think that is a big question. Do we want literate people, or do we want qualified people? Do we want numerate people, or do we want qualified? And I think as a country, we need to start looking at numeracy and literacy, not qualifications. But I sit on a group looking at that. So that doesn't really help you, but I do think we've got to work harder. And one of the things we're looking at as you really do need to teach English and Maths through the vocational area, because that's what students like to do. But in some cases, particularly trades, we were Ofsteded last week and it was, we did very well, but it's one of the issues that was raised in our trades, that the teaching of spelling and grammar wasn't good enough because our teachers from those trades weren't strong enough. So I think there's a whole upskilling, frankly, of some of our teachers to enable our students to get level, at the right level in English and Maths.
Now that's really helpful, Sally, and actually that builds on the next question in many ways, because you've given some examples there of what we can do, but this is about the level 2 to level 3 transition, if you like. Someone who's been out of work for so long, out of learning for so long, how do we, enable their pre-entry confidence and build up their skills? And I think one of the other ones that we haven't talked about is the digital skill element. But is there anything in addition to what you've said there that you think we need to focus on? And that's to help that transition, really.
I mean, I think we need to look at the teachers teaching it. So we, for instance, have excellent engineers, but I wouldn't put them on a level 2 transition programme because they don't have the necessary skills and requirement to do exactly what's been put in there. Confidence building, study skills, and you're right, Gavin, as we discussed it as sort of not the digital native generation. I mean, if I look at my own digital skills aren't brilliant and I use it all the time. So what must it be like if I was in a sector where I wasn't? Yeah. I think we need to look at how we design the learning. And this is going to sound backwards, but we concentrate too much on teaching. I'm not interested in teaching, I'm interested in learning. So how do we get teachers to look at learning opposed to teaching, if you like? And I think there's some fantastic programs. The issue is, will the government fund them? I think, and again, if we can show fantastic pathways through FE to people actually getting degrees, which I don't think we've ever mapped, they might give us the money, but we haven't got that evidence. And I think that's the evidence we need. They spent a year at, I don't know, we'll say City of Oxford College. They then went on to Brooks, and now look at them, they're amazing. Where is the evidence? And the government won't give it to us. So I think we need to build up that evidence.
Thanks, Sally. And the final question here from Shamil about how the government might use the COVID-19 crisis for helping to resolve some of the hard social problems and for creating more social equality and prosperity. Now, there's a big question for you.
Well, I'm going to be cynical, having been Ofsteded last week and had what appeared to be very little consideration of the COVID, I would say not much. I think it's an interesting one, and I think the spending review for me will tell us whether they're going to take that seriously. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Mark Rushwood, his speech at the University of Manchester when he was getting his doctorate about please keep that £20, and them saying, no, we're going to create high jobs. I think it is about employers, because will employers actually train? So one of the problems why we have the social inequalities we have now is we've underpaid lots of people in the workforce because we could. We had people coming in from Brexit countries. We're now seeing for the first time, for instance, and I'm boring on the HGV, but their salaries have gone up. So we need to work with employers so they actually pay living wage, because actually things like giving an extra £20 on income support is often because employers are not paying people enough. So we need to actually make employers pay the right salary. So those who are really at the bottom, there is enough money left over for them. And I think we, that's colleges and universities, really need to look at how are we enabling learning so that we actually do it better.
Indeed, absolutely. Right, on that note, I think we close this session, but Sally, thank you enormously for your presentation, and again to Chris, thank you enormously to you for your presentation also. I think we've had two really excellent presentations to start this conference. So we've now come to the break before our next sessions. So please do join us again at 11:15 for our workshop presentations. You need to click the appropriate workstream link to join the session. And the links can be found in the conference booklet and on the Study Hire website. So thanks again to everybody for joining this morning, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.